There is a principle in electronic warfare that operators learn early and apply constantly. If you emit, you can be found. The corollary is equally fundamental. If you stop emitting, the systems that depend on your emissions stop working. In most operational contexts, these two facts exist in tension but do not produce a crisis. The operator manages their emission profile, reduces output when the environment permits, and accepts the risk of detection when the mission requires continuous operation. The principle becomes a crisis when the emission that reveals your position is also the emission that guides the incoming ordnance toward your position, and when the only sensor capable of tracking that ordnance operates by detecting your emission, meaning that stopping the emission removes the threat but also blinds the only system that can intercept it. At 4:17 a.m. on a Thursday in November, the Romanian Air Force radar station at Constanta-Sud was operating at full power on its primary acquisition frequency, providing air picture coverage across the western Black Sea that the NATO Baltic air policing mission's regional picture depended on. The station had been continuously active for 9 hours. Its operators were midway through the night watch rotation. The station's position, its operating frequency, its current emission power, and its precise location had been known to every signals intelligence asset monitoring the Black Sea for at least the past 7 years. The Su-24 M2 fencer that had departed the Russian naval aviation base at Saki in Crimea at 4:09 a.m. was at 320 feet above the Black Sea surface, heading 278 degrees at 480 knots. Its radar altimeter was maintaining the 320-foot profile automatically. Its own radar was in standby, no emissions, passive flight, the navigation driven by inertial reference and GPS. At 4:09 a.m., the contact had been below the NATO surveillance radar horizon for most of its flight. The Sentry's picture had not resolved it until 4:14 a.m., when the Su-24 climbed briefly to 800 feet, a profile consistent with a crew taking a final positional fix before beginning the attack run, and then descended back to 320 feet. At 4:14 a.m., the contact characterization had produced a Su-24 type assessment. The heading of 278 degrees from the Su-24's current position led directly to the Constanta-Sud radar station, 84 nautical miles ahead. The altitude of 320 feet above the Black Sea was the optimal profile for a Kh-25 anti-radiation missile employment, low enough to remain below most surface-based radar detection geometry for as long as possible, high enough to maintain stable flight and allow the Kh-25 seeker to acquire the target station's emissions from standoff range before release. The Kh-25 MP is the anti-radiation variant of the Kh-25 tactical missile family. Its Kh-25 designation is shared with several variants, including the Kh-25 ML laser-guided and Kh-25 MR radio command variants, but the MP suffix specifically identifies the passive radar homing seeker that homes on electromagnetic emissions. It is a short-range system. Maximum effective range approximately 40 kilometers against a ground-based emitter, which means the Su-24 had to close to within 40 kilometers of the Constanta-Sud station before release. At 84 nautical miles, the Su-24 was still 156 kilometers from the station. The release window was 11 minutes away at current speed, 11 minutes. The F-35 C-section at the NATO air policing cap station, 160 nautical miles northwest of the Su-24's current position, received the contact update and the threat assessment simultaneously. The CAOC transmission included the tactical framing that the geometry imposed. Su-24 on Kh-25 MP approach profile, 11 minutes to release window. Target is Constanta-Sud radar station. Recommend immediate Constanta-Sud shutdown to deny seeker acquisition. Recommend immediate shutdown. The CAOC was recommending, not ordering. The Constanta-Sud station was a Romanian Air Force installation operating under Romanian national authority. The CAOC could recommend its shutdown. The Romanian Air Force's duty command could authorize or decline. The chain of command for shutting down a national military installation in a NATO context passed through the Romanian Air Force, not through the CAOC. At 4:15 a.m., the CAOC relayed the recommendation to the Romanian Air Force duty officer at Mihail Cogălnicianu Air Base. The duty officer relayed it to the Constanta-Sud station commander. At 4:15 a.m. and 41 seconds, the station commander's response arrived at the CAOC. The station would not shut down. The reason was operational and was stated clearly. The Constanta-Sud station was currently providing the only radar coverage of the Western Black Sea approach corridor that was tracking 3 additional contacts, a formation of unidentified aircraft at 28,000 feet, bearing 041, range 190 nautical miles, that had appeared on the station's picture at 4:12 a.m. and had not yet been resolved as type confirmed. If the Constanta-Sud station went offline, those 3 contacts would be lost from the coverage picture for the duration of the restart cycle. Given that the station was the only asset with current track on those contacts, going dark meant losing situational awareness on an unresolved formation during the same period that a Su-24 was approaching with an anti-radiation missile. The station commander's tactical logic was coherent. The 3 unresolved contacts at 28,000 feet might be the more significant element of the situation. A Su-24 approaching at low altitude with an anti-radiation missile might be a coordinated element of a larger operation. The visible probe designed to force the radar station offline so the high-altitude formation could operate without coverage. Going dark to protect against the anti-radiation missile might be exactly what the operation was designed to produce. The station commander would not shut down. At 4:15 a.m. and 59 seconds, the F-35C section received the CAOC's updated instruction. Constanta-Sud, maintaining emission. Station commander declined shutdown pending resolution of the high-altitude contacts. Your tasking: intercept Kh-25 MP if employed. Track using station emissions as reference. Defend the station. Intercept using station emissions as reference. This was the operational translation of the physics. The Kh-25 MP's seeker homed on the Constanta-Sud station's emissions. The station's emissions were detectable by the F-35C's own radar as a ground emitter source. If the F-35C could track the Kh-25 MP by correlating the missile's position against the station's emission bearing, using the station's continuous radar transmissions as an acoustic reference, the way a submarine uses a steady sound source to triangulate a contact, then the station's decision to remain active provided the F-35C with the tracking reference it needed. If the station shut down, the Kh-25 MP would enter its memory mode and continue on the last known bearing. The F-35C would lose its tracking reference simultaneously. The missile's terminal guidance would be degraded by the emission loss. But so would the F-35C's ability to intercept it. Both tracking solutions depended on the station continuing to transmit. Both missile and interceptor were guided by the same source. The geometry was the Hormuz engagements paradox applied to a ground emitter, and this time, the emitter's operator had decided to keep transmitting. At 4:18 a.m., the F-35C section accelerated to Mach 1.12 on an intercept bearing. The APG-81 in passive mode was registering the Constanta-Sud station's emission from bearing 284, the station's known position, as a strong, stable ground return. The emission was clean, consistent, at the frequency band the intelligence database associated with the station's specific radar variant. It was also, from any bearing in a large volume of the Western Black Sea airspace, an unambiguous directional marker pointing at the station's position. A marker that the Kh-25 MP's seeker was designed to follow. At 4:19 a.m., the Su-24 climbed to 1,400 feet. Not a positional fix this time. A pre-release altitude adjustment, the Kh-25 required the launch aircraft to be above a minimum altitude at release to allow the missile's seeker to acquire the target emission before impact. 1,400 feet was above that minimum. The climb was the release configuration. The first friction event at 4:19 a.m. and 12 seconds was the CAOC transmitting a second recommendation to the Constanta-Sud station. The Su-24 is in pre-release configuration, estimated 90 seconds from release window. Recommendation remains immediate shutdown. The CAOC was retransmitting the original recommendation with updated urgency, providing the station commander with the information that the tactical picture had changed from approach to imminent release. The station commander's response came in 14 seconds. Understood. Station maintaining emission, tracking 3 high-altitude contacts now at 27,000 feet and descending, bearing 041, estimated 170 nautical miles. The high-altitude formation was descending. The station commander's picture was evolving toward what might be a coordinated high-low attack profile, a low-altitude anti-radiation strike to blind the radar, followed by a high-altitude conventional strike once the blind spot was created. Understood and maintaining. The station commander had received the urgency update and had calculated that the cost of losing the high-altitude formation track exceeded the risk to the station from the Kh-25, presumably on the basis that a successful intercept by the F-35 C section would neutralize the anti-radiation missile, while no asset other than his station was currently tracking the formation. The tactical pressure on the F-35 C section had been specified by the station commander's decision. The intercept was now mandatory, not optional. At 4:20 a.m., the Su-24 reached its release altitude of 1,400 feet, and its speed decreased to 440 knots, the optimal release speed for the Kh-25 at this range to the target. The release profile was visible in the APG-81's passive picture: the altitude stabilization, the speed reduction, the heading lock. All 3 indicators pointed at a crew completing a release checklist rather than transitioning to a different flight profile. The Kh-25 released at 4:20 a.m. and 22 seconds. The infrared signature of the missile's solid fuel motor was visible on the DAS system immediately. A hard thermal event at the Su-24's position, the motor igniting and the missile separating from the aircraft's port station. The Su-24's nose dropped toward the surface simultaneously with the release, the crew beginning their post-release egress back toward low altitude and the return heading. The Kh-25 was airborne, seeker active, homing on the Constanta-Sud station's emission. Range to the station from release point, 38 nautical miles. At the Kh-25's motor-powered cruise speed of approximately 850 kilometers per hour, the missile would reach the station in approximately 161 seconds. 2 minutes and 41 seconds. The F-35C's intercept solution required 3 elements: a current position on the Kh-25, a fire control solution on the Kh-25, and a valid AIM-120D employment geometry. The current position was being built from the DAS thermal track of the missile's motor plume, combined with the APG-81's correlation of the missile's position against the Constanta-Sud emission bearing. The Kh-25 was following the emission bearing precisely, which meant its track was predictable. If you knew the bearing to the station and the missile's current position and speed, you could project its terminal path with high confidence. The fire control solution confidence at 4:20 a.m. and 40 seconds. 44%. The Kh-25's small radar cross-section and low altitude. The missile was flying at 200 feet above the Black Sea's surface, using the terrain-following mode that its inertial mid-course guidance provided until the passive seeker's terminal phase began, was producing the same clutter geometry that every low-altitude intercept created. The sea surface return was masking the Kh-25's radar return in the same frequency ranges the APG-81 was using for fire control. The second friction event at 4:21 a.m. was the Constanta-Sud station's first emission interruption. Not a shutdown, the station was not shutting down. An automatic frequency agility cycle that the station's radar performed periodically to reduce jamming vulnerability. A 1.4-second interruption in the primary emission, while the frequency agility circuit reset to a new operating frequency within the station's allocated band. A 1.4-second gap in the emission the Kh-25 was homing on. The Kh-25's seeker would handle a 1.4-second emission gap by entering a brief coast mode. The seeker maintained the last known bearing for the gap duration, then reacquired when the emission resumed on the new frequency. Depending on the Kh-25 variant's seeker sensitivity and frequency agility range, the reacquisition might be instantaneous or might require a brief scan. For the F-35C, the 1.4-second emission gap removed the primary tracking reference. The APG-81's correlation method depended on the station's emission as the fixed reference point against which the missile's position was measured. Without the reference for 1.4 seconds, the missile's position was extrapolated from its last known track, introducing a positional uncertainty of approximately 0.35 nautical miles at the Kh-25's current speed. When the station reacquired its emission at 4:21 a.m. and 8 seconds, the Kh-25 was at a position 0.35 nautical miles, offset from the APG-81's extrapolated track. The fire control solution confidence dropped from its building rate to 31%, requiring the algorithm to rebuild from the updated emission correlation. At 4:21 a.m. and 22 seconds, the APG-81 went to full tactical power. The decision was driven by time, not by solution confidence. At full power, the solution would rebuild in approximately 4 seconds rather than the 8 to 12 seconds that the LPI mode's slower build rate required. The Kh-25 had 98 seconds remaining to the station. At full power, the solution would reach 75% threshold in 4 seconds. At LPI power, the 75% threshold was approximately 8 to 12 seconds away. The 4-second versus 8-second difference was operationally meaningful at this moment in the engagement sequence. The solution reached 78% at 4:21 a.m. and 26 seconds. Green. The AIM-120D employment geometry was valid. The AIM-120D released at 4:21 a.m. and 28 seconds. Fox 3. Range to the Kh-25 at release, 18 nautical miles. The missile's seeker would activate at approximately 4 nautical miles from the target, with an expected acquisition time of 1.1 seconds against a small, fast, low-altitude target. The Constanta-Sud station's emission was continuous from 4:21 a.m. and 8 seconds through the AIM-120D's terminal phase. No additional frequency agility cycles. The station's radar was operating without interruption, providing both the Kh-25's terminal guidance and the F-35C's tracking reference simultaneously in the same electromagnetic event. At 4:22 a.m. and 7 seconds, the AIM-120D's seeker activated at 4.1 nautical miles from the Kh-25's position. Acquisition, 1.3 seconds. A marginal acquisition, the sea surface clutter at 200 feet altitude, was affecting the seeker's discrimination in the same way it had affected the APG-81's fire control solution. The seeker's ECCM processing worked through the clutter in 1.3 seconds and established a track. The Kinetic event occurred at 4:22 a.m. and 14 seconds. The Kh-25 was 22 nautical miles from the Constanta-Sud station at the moment of impact. 22 nautical miles, inside the missile's maximum effective range, outside its minimum effective range. The station had been in the terminal guidance window for 12 of the 98 seconds remaining at missile release. The Constanta-Sud station continued operating at 4:22 a.m. and 15 seconds, 1 second after the Kinetic event. Its emission was uninterrupted. Its radar picture remained active. The 3 high-altitude contacts at bearing 041 were still on the station's display, now at 26,000 feet, still descending, now positively characterized by the station's own picture as 3 Su-30SM aircraft on a bearing that would intersect the Romanian Addis boundary in approximately 14 minutes if they maintained their current heading. The station commander's assessment that the high-altitude formation represented the more significant tactical element had been, in the outcome, correct. The Su-30SMs had descended while the anti-radiation missile engagement was occurring. If the station had gone offline at the CAOC's recommendation, the Su-30SM formation's descent would have been unobserved during the radar restart cycle, a 9-minute window in which 3 Su-30SMs descending toward the Romanian ADAZ from 28,000 feet would have been invisible to the primary coverage asset for the Western Black Sea. The CAOC activated the F-35 C-section's tasking against the Su-30SM formation at 4:22 a.m. and 41 seconds. The Su-30SMs turned northeast at 4:26 a.m. before the F-35 C-section reached fire control geometry and began aggressing toward the Crimean coast at Mach 0.94, 4 aircraft. The Su-24 was already at 200 feet over the Black Sea, heading east, having executed its post-release egress without further incident. The Su-30SMs were returning without having crossed the ADIZ boundary. The debrief at 5:45 a.m. ran 2 hours and 18 minutes. It was attended by the CAOC duty officer, the F-35 C-section, the Constanta-Sud station commander via secure video link, and a Romanian Air Force officer from Mihail Kogolnicianu. The first finding was the one that the engagement had most directly produced. The station commander's decision to remain active had been operationally justified by the outcome. The high-altitude Su-30SM formation's behavior, descending toward the ADIZ boundary during the anti-radiation missile engagement phase, was consistent with a coordinated probe designed to exploit the radar gap that a station shutdown would have created. The formation had turned back when the station's continued coverage made clear that the gap had not materialized. The Constanta-Sud station's continuity of operation had been a factor in the Su-30SMS decision. The second finding was the intercept tracking methodology. The APG-81's correlation of the Kh-25MP's position against the station's emission bearing had been the primary tracking data throughout the engagement. The method worked because the Kh-25MP's predictable homing path, defined by the emission bearing, allowed the correlation to function even when the APG-81's own fire control confidence was below threshold. The method's limitation was the emission gap. When the station's frequency agility cycle interrupted the emission, the tracking reference disappeared and confidence had to be rebuilt. The recommendation was to incorporate the Constanta-Sud station's frequency agility cycle timing into the pre-engagement briefing for future intercept scenarios against Kh-25MP class missiles from this station. The third finding was the command authority question. The CAOC had recommended shutdown. The station commander had declined. The outcome had validated the station commander's judgment. But the process by which the command authority question had been resolved, the CAOC making a recommendation, waiting for a national command response, receiving a decline, and then adapting the tasking to the decline, had consumed 41 seconds between the initial recommendation and the updated tasking. 41 seconds was a significant portion of the 11-minute approach window. In a faster engagement, a shorter approach, a shorter release window, the command authority resolution delay could be operationally consequential. The fourth finding was the most structurally significant. The engagement had produced a scenario where a national military assets commander had made a decision that directly affected a NATO air policing operation's tactical requirements. And neither the CAOC nor the NATO air policing mission had any authority to override that decision. The resolution had been favorable because the station commander's judgment had been correct, and the F-35C intercept had been successful. The resolution of a scenario where the station commander's judgment was incorrect and the intercept failed was a question the debrief could not answer from the outcome of this engagement. It was a question for the NATO Command Authority review that the CAOC duty officer submitted as a recommendation at 6:12 a.m. The submission was the first of its kind in the current rotations record. Whether it would be the last depended on whether the next Su-24 to climb off a Crimean runway was following the same doctrine its predecessor had used at 4:09 a.m. 1 Su-24M2, 1 Kh-25MP, 3 Su-30 SMs, 1 F-35 C-section, 1 Constanta-Sud radar station with one operator who had declined a NATO recommendation, 98 seconds from missile release to intercept, 31% confidence at the lowest point of the fire control solution build, 78% at employment. Kinetic event at 22 nautical miles from the station. Station emission interrupted, 0 seconds after the kinetic event. High altitude formation turned back before ADIZ crossing. Confirmed. Command Authority resolution time, 41 seconds. Ordnance employed, 1 AIM-120D, $1.1 million. The Black Sea at 5 a.m. was dark and cold. The Constanta-Sud station was still operating at full power, its emission crossing the water toward the Crimean coast in the same direction the Su-24 had come from. The 3 Su-30 SMs were somewhere above the Crimean plateau. The station commander was reviewing the high-altitude formation's track data on his display for the debrief submission. The CAOC's Command Authority review recommendation was in the queue. The queue moved at the speed of alliance governance. The Black Sea moved at the speed of the operational tempo. The two speeds were not the same.